Hey guys, my name is Ewan and welcome to my review of The Last of Us TV series. Now, I know for a fact that you don't need me to be able to figure out that it's the best adaptation that there's ever been. All you have to do is go on the internet for no more than 10 seconds and you'll see The Last of Us news plastered all over the place. Obviously that's for good reason though. Before we get properly into this review, I think it's common courtesy to give you a pre-warning that I will be comparing the show to the game a lot, as I played the game alongside the show. I don't mean that as in I played the game and watched the show side by side, and multitasked or whatever, but in reality the way I did this was I would watch The Last of Us episode 1, and then I would play the game up until the point where the show left off, which actually led me to really appreciate just how accurate the show is to the game, not only in dialogue or script, but also in camera angles, movements, and set design. I'll go more in depth on these things later on though. But obviously after each week, I'd then have to wait for the next episode so I could repeat that process of watching and then playing until I would get to where it left off in the show, which at times was hard because all I wanted to do was play the game. But I also didn't want to spoil the show for me. I wanted to make a review which had a unique perspective of somebody who played the game after the show, even if after the show meant like after each episode because I loved it so much. Anyways, let's stop babbling, I'm getting ahead of myself. Roll the intro. With something as big as taking on one of the most popular video games in the world and making that into a show, you'd expect this to turn out like any other video game to TV adaptation. Super Mario Bros. 1993. But in reality, we somehow ended up with what everyone is now considering to be the absolute highest standards for adaptations. And I can safely say I agree with that too. However, that's not to say it's perfect. I'll talk about what I mean by this later though. For now, let's focus on the positives of The Last of Us. Needless to say, Ellie and Joel, played by Bella Ramsey and Pedro Pascal, are some of the most popular video game characters to exist, so when people found out that they were coming to HBO for a series which would surround the events of the game, there were a lot of mixed reactions. Some acted as though the world was going to end if it didn't translate well to TV, whereas others, like me, were purely excited to see how it could do, or if it might ruin the characters for some long-term fans of the games. But you know, by now I think it's pretty safe to say that nobody has been disappointed by how the characters' arcs went throughout the story. I think the best thing to do right now is analyse both Ellie and Joel's characters one by one, and then I'll tell you about my thoughts on how they were portrayed in the show. Firstly, Pedro Pascal really smashed this role out of the ballpark. I think it really was perfect casting for the role. He really let us see a side of Joel that isn't really emphasised in the game, and it really does wonders later on in the show to bring emotions out of the audience. The side I talk about, of course, is this completely distraught, broken man who has been trying to deal with the loss of his daughter for 20 years, but ultimately hasn't gotten anywhere with overcoming that tragic event. But in the show, they lean into this a lot more, and Pedro Pascal really nails this portrayal of Joel. Just incredible acting on his part. The emotionless and dark way in which he delivers his lines and acts, strangely enough, show a lot of emotion throughout the show and really makes the audience feel bad for him. Before I get into the portrayal of Ellie's character, I feel I have to mention that when Bella Ramsey was announced as the person who was going to play Ellie, I wasn't too thrilled by that as she didn't look anything like the character she would be playing and, you know, at the time she was a relatively unknown actress to me. However, as soon as the show started, I quickly came to realise that the way in which Bella portrayed Ellie is so accurate and so good that I didn't really care about how much she didn't really look like the Ellie from the games. I also saw this reaction online from many other people, so hopefully that teaches us not to judge the casting too fast. The way in which Bella delivers her lines as Ellie, especially when she's angry or swearing, are most definitely the best part of her character. As in the game, Ellie constantly uses bad language, and this is probably something everyone can recognise her character from. She was also great as the comedy relief of the entire show, in times where I didn't even think it needed comedy, but it really did help to feel more realistic. Wouldn't have picked anyone different to play Ellie now. I'll keep this short and sweet. Exceptional job on both sides, 10 out of 10 performance. Here's the thing, okay? They were just extremely underutilised in the show and extremely overutilised in the game. That's the best way to put it, unfortunately. The infected were some of the best aspects of this show, but unfortunately they sort of fade into the background a lot more after episode 5. Just with a few appearances every now and then, but not as much as everyone would have liked to have seen. I personally would have liked to see more horror aspects in the infected, as in the games you're always having to sneak past clickers and runners, but you don't really see any of that past episode 2. I have seen some reports saying that the people working on season 2 know people want to see more infected, and they have been saying that that will happen next time, so we'll have to see. Otherwise, the amount of infected was good for the pacing of the show, it just could have been done more like in the games, but certainly not exactly as much in the games. That was one of my biggest annoyances in it. Each time I'd have to sneak through infected areas, it became more of a chore than a major contribution to the story. Overall, still fun, but just really tedious. It's pretty clear that they really stuck to being as accurate as possible to the game while also taking some liberties story-wise. However, for the most part, they did an incredible job. The entire story made sense, and it all worked well considering a lot of the writing and script was just taken from the game. At least the major lines were. I think there were points in which they wasted a lot of time that could have been better spent on the main character's dynamics or sneaking through more infected areas. The episode in which I think really didn't add a lot was episode 3. Now, episode 3 was probably one of the most emotionally heartbreaking things I've seen in a while, and it was incredible. It really was. But it wasn't necessary at all. It was a long way to show how Ellie and Joel got their truck to be able to travel wherever they needed to go. I really don't think it was 100% necessary to the story to spend as much time with those characters in episode 3 when they don't particularly contribute to the overarching story the show follows. But hey, it was an amazing episode nonetheless. It's weird to say that such an incredible episode was so... I don't want to say pointless, but it almost was. It was just long and could have been better used to flesh out Joel and Ellie's dynamic a bit more. The world of The Last of Us as a whole is incredible. The set designs and the CGI background look immense. The infected, particularly the clickers, costumes, design was insanely awesome, although there were some parts in which I think they could have maybe done some more things the game did to add a little more spice to it. For example, in the last episode, it felt particularly rushed, as if they really just wanted to get Joel into the hospital so he could go all John Wick on everybody to save Ellie. In the game, before they make it to the hospital, they have to go through this flooded tunnel, and there's this big sequence where Joel gets swept away by the water, and Ellie, who can't swim, jumps in to try and save Joel, but ends up almost drowning. Now, throughout the game, it emphasises that Ellie can't swim, so when this happens, it's a big panic, and it adds a lot more to the final act of the game. The show doesn't even deal with the fact that Ellie can't swim, and completely misses out that sequence, which would have been incredible to see. Obviously, that's just a small thing I didn't like. It didn't ruin the entire show for me, but there are definitely points it suffers from being too rushed or too slow throughout the show. Overall, the ending was faithful to the original game, and it was done really well. I'd say that's my favourite show of the year already, so something really amazing would have to come along to blast that show out of the water for me to change my mind about what my favourite show is this year. You know, overall, I give The Last of Us series a 90% rating, and the game also gets a 90% rating, because both have unique qualities that either drags them down, or most of the time, elevates it to a more amazing level. There's always that little bit more of improvements that could be done to each of them, which is why I went for a 90% rating. But oh my god, it was a spectacular show. I recommend everyone watches it at some point, but anyway, that's about it. I hope you all enjoyed my review. If you did, please remember to like and subscribe, maybe even comment, and I'll see you guys in the next video.